Have you ever wondered what lies beneath your feet, far below the streets, subways, and roots of trees? You bend closer to the soil, imagining a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers, a hidden world vibrating silently beneath the surface. The air feels cooler here, damp, tinged with minerals, and a hint of something almost electric, like static just before a storm. You try to convince yourself it's imagination, a trick of shadow and thought, yet your curiosity gnaws at you insistently. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, post your location and local time. Let's chart the global whispers together. You step lightly, as if the ground itself might notice your intentions, and begin a journey where the line between myth and reality bends beneath your awareness. Beneath the crust of the earth, legends of Agartha have slumbered for centuries, whispered in the halls of forgotten monasteries, inked faintly on ancient maps, and murmured in the journals of explorers who vanished mysteriously. You run your fingers over a worn parchment, noting the fine lines representing rivers and mountains that seem strangely familiar, yet subtly altered. Mainstream history tells us that underground cities exist in Turkey's Cappadocia region, carved to shelter entire communities from invading armies. Yet Agartha's purported scale dwarfs even those subterranean marvels. Historians still argue whether these tales sprang from tangible experiences or from allegorical fantasies. But your senses insist there is more than metaphor at play. As you descend mentally into this hidden world, you notice how the imagination embellishes the mundane. A flicker of candlelight in a cave might, in legend, become a glowing crystal city. Yet some accounts describe corridors lined with metals that hum softly with the resonance of knowledge, almost musical. Fringe researchers whisper of tunnels in the Himalayas or polar regions that could lead to entrances sometimes guarded by enigmatic monoliths. You smile at the thought, monoliths that no one checks the receipt for silently daring explorers like yourself to notice. The soil under your hand vibrates subtly, as if echoing secrets only the curious can feel. Agartha, they say, exists not merely in space, but in perception, a layer of reality folded beneath the surface. You catch yourself imagining inhabitants with translucent skin or elongated limbs smiling as they go about tasks unknown above ground. Then a cheeky reminder, probably they just laugh at your clumsy boots, the way humans chuckle at ants struggling across a picnic table. And yet there's reverence in this imagination, a slow, steady awareness that every shadow, every echo might carry a fragment of truth. Walking further, your mind drifts to the scholars who argue endlessly about the Hollow Earth hypothesis. Some insist it's a Victorian fantasy. Others claim sonar readings and magnetic anomalies suggest massive voids below the crust. You feel a shiver of anticipation, the thrill of walking a line where science and legend collide. The damp air carries the scent of stone, of ancient watercourses, and faintly a hint of something metallic. Maybe it's the earth herself breathing quietly, as if she knows your curiosity, and waits to see how far you dare descend. You pause at an imagined junction left toward icy catacombs whispered about in Tibetan myths, right toward warm tunnels glowing softly with light that needs no flame. You imagine the hum of machinery, not industrial but organic, a blend of intellect and life force. Mainstream archaeology acknowledges the ingenuity of human engineering in subterranean habitats, but Agartha pushes that concept into poetic extremes. Historians still argue whether these descriptions are symbolic representations of enlightenment or actual physical constructs. You shrug. Either way, it feels real to you, and for now, that is enough. A tiny laugh escapes you as your imagination runs wild. Perhaps the Agarthans have a bureaucratic system filing permits for tunnels complete with stamps, and tiny underground coffee breaks. And yet, beneath the humor, your mind trembles slightly at the thought that there could be knowledge preserved here, untouched for millennia, waiting for someone perceptive enough to find it. The stories insist on secrecy, yet tantalize with glimpses, maps drawn on animal skins, writings in languages long extinct, and faintly glowing glyphs that hint at wisdom, science, and art intertwined. The further you descend in your imagination, the more vivid the world becomes. You smell damp stone, hear water dripping in rhythms almost musical. Feel the cool air brush your skin. Even in this first step, you understand why Agartha has captivated minds across cultures. It is both refuge and enigma, a city of mysterious beings, and an invitation to reconsider the limits of reality itself. And as the first shadows lengthen, you realize that this journey is no longer about believing or disbelieving. It is about seeing, sensing, and experiencing the hidden world beneath your feet, one heartbeat at a time. You trace your fingers over the edges of an ancient map, feeling the worn grooves where ink has faded into the paper, yet still whispers of a world beneath the surface linger. The cartographers of old, working with quills and candlelight, drew lines that suggest caverns, tunnels, and hidden valleys under continents you know well. Some of these maps are unmistakably precise mountain ranges. Rivers and coastlines align with modern geography, while other portions curve and twist in ways that defy logic, hinting at places that perhaps exist only in memory or legend. Fringe theorists insist these are evidence of Agartha's true extent, a network so vast it would take lifetimes to traverse. Historians still argue whether these sketches were purely imaginative, allegorical, or based on first-hand accounts. You lean closer, aware that some of the corners of these maps were deliberately obscured, as if the creators feared that knowledge itself could be dangerous in untrained hands. As you study the drawings, you can almost hear the whispered debates of Renaissance scholars. They argued over far more than kingdoms and coastlines. They speculated about realms beneath the earth, sometimes laughing at their own audacity, sometimes shivering with awe. You imagine candlelight flickering on their faces as they tried to reconcile classical texts, travelers' tales, and oral traditions from distant lands. One map in particular catches your attention, an intricate labyrinth beneath what we now call the Himalayas, a region long associated with spiritual ascent above ground, but here imagined as a descent. You smirk slightly. Humans always seem to associate mystery with extremes, either freezing peaks or fiery depths. Yet you feel a thrill, the possibility that somewhere a corridor like this exists in physical form, waiting for someone perceptive enough to follow its path. While mainstream history documents subterranean dwellings like the Cappadocia cities in Turkey, the Derinkuyu network accommodating thousands in complex, multi-level tunnels, Agartha legends claim a scale and sophistication that surpass even the most impressive known examples. Here, tunnels are said to stretch for hundreds, if not thousands of miles, lined with smooth stone walls inscribed with symbols that hum softly when touched. Some fringe writers describe luminescent veins of crystal that provide natural lighting and energy, allowing the underground world to thrive without fire. Historians still argue whether these reports are exaggerated embellishments, mythic allegories of enlightenment, or fragments of ancient knowledge long forgotten. You shrug at the ambiguity, it only makes the mystery more intoxicating. Curiosity drives you to consider the stories of explorers who sought these hidden corridors. Many vanished without a trace, leaving only notes in journals or fragmented sketches. One entry describes a cavern where stalactites shimmered like chandeliers, yet the scale was vast enough to feel like an entire city carved into stone. You chuckle to yourself, imagining the explorer's awe, maybe some faintly clumsy sense of vertigo, at realizing they were mere specks in a subterranean cathedral. Yet amid the humor, You sense a reverent hush as if the earth itself demanded respect for secrets so carefully hidden. You notice patterns in the legend's gateways often appear near mountains, ancient ruins, or polar regions. Tibet, Mongolia, and the Arctic are frequently cited. Fringe theories speak of hidden doors, carved monoliths, or natural formations that act as keys. Stones aligned with solstices, maven mouths shaped like symbols lost to time. Mainstream historians tend to dismiss these as fanciful speculation, yet occasional anomalies like unusual magnetic readings or unexplained ice caverns fuel ongoing debates. You imagine standing before such a doorway, hesitant, yet drawn forward, heart-quickening, with the thrill of forbidden discovery. As you linger on the maps, your mind drifts to the people who first wrote about Agartha monks, travelers, and esoteric scholars. They described a civilization with its own architecture, governance, and wisdom, tucked away in subterranean expanses. Some accounts mention vast libraries filled with knowledge lost above ground, where thought itself shapes the environment. You grin at the mental image, a librarian whispering to a glowing crystal that adjusts shelves based on curiosity rather than strict cataloging rules. Yet you know the charm of Agartha is precisely in this blend of the believable and the absurd, the mundane and the magical. Finally, you consider the scholars who debate endlessly over these maps. Some insist the maps were symbolic guides to spiritual ascent, not physical descent. Others claim that explorers' testimonies hint at a genuine subterranean civilization. You lean back, imagining the centuries of whispered conjecture and heated argument. Yet somehow the arguments only add depth to the world below. Every faded line, every hidden corridor, every tantalizing note feels alive, as if the earth remembers what has been concealed. You close the map, gently aware that each layer of knowledge brings you closer to the pulse of Agartha itself, a rhythm waiting for the right listener to hear. You move along imagined corridors of rock and shadow, aware that entrances to Agartha are said to be hidden in the most unlikely places. Some lie tucked beneath monasteries disguised as old cellars or meditation chambers. Others hide behind frozen glaciers in polar regions where winds howl like spirits warning you away. A few stories speak of mountains that shift subtly with the seasons, opening passages only at precise celestial alignments. Fringe theorists suggest these entrances are protected not only by physical barriers but by consciousness itself, as if the world tests the intent of those who seek to enter. Historians still argue whether these tales are coded metaphors for enlightenment or veiled records of real-world discoveries. You pause, imagining yourself tracing a line of icy rock eyes, narrowing, as if sheer will could reveal the secret doorway. Your mind drifts to explorers who claimed to have stumbled upon these thresholds. One writes of a cavern mouth hidden behind a waterfall, so silent and smooth that water seemed to flow over the rock without sound. Another journal describes a mountain whose snow-covered peak bore a faint geometric pattern that only revealed itself under moonlight. You grin. Humans have always had a flair for drama, turning the ordinary into spectacular, yet something about these descriptions resonates with a familiar sense of logic, as if the earth itself has rules unknown to the uninitiated. The real trick these stories suggest is knowing when to look and when to step back. In some accounts, Agartha's entrances are guarded by natural formations that defy simple explanation. Monoliths carved with glyphs, walls of rock that seem to breathe, or faintly glowing crystal veins appear to mark the thresholds. You imagine running your hand along a monolith and feeling a vibration pulse softly through your fingertips, a tactile whisper saying, "Proceed only if ready." Fringe writers claim that these protective measures are intelligent, adjusting to those who approach, sometimes opening only for those with a certain mindset or purity of purpose. Mainstream archaeologists skeptical, but intrigued note, peculiar geological formations in these regions, but stop short of attributing consciousness. You chuckle lightly, thinking that perhaps the Earth enjoys a good practical joke. The most compelling stories are often found in the margins of history, tucked into monks' diaries, explorers' journals, or legends passed orally through remote communities. One Tibetan account mentions a concealed cave where the wind forms a melody only audible to those who listen with intention. Another Arctic tale speaks of a fissure in the ice that seems to shift its location, leaving the seeker to rely on intuition rather than measurement. You can't help but smile at the poetic quality, imagining a nature so aware it plays hide and seek across continents. Yet you feel a shiver too, the possibility that someone somewhere has already passed through such a door. As you ponder, your imagination adds subtle humor. Perhaps one entrance has a tiny "Do Not Disturb" sign, or Agarthans watch surface humans like curious ants, laughing at how clumsy our attempts are to penetrate their domain. Still, the legends consistently emphasize vigilance, patience, and respect. You picture explorers standing before a perfectly ordinary rock wall, hesitant, wondering if the mountain judges their resolve. These thresholds seem to demand more than tools. They require perception, a quietude of mind, and willingness to follow subtle signs. Some entrances are reportedly accessible via forgotten temples, their basements extending into the earth in a series of tunnels that bend geography itself. Others are said to exist in polar ice, revealed only during rare celestial alignments. Fringe accounts even suggest entrances underwater, submerged in lakes that reflect the sky like mirrors, requiring both courage and ingenuity to navigate. Historians still argue whether any such entrance has ever been verified, or whether these accounts are allegorical, passed down as moral or spiritual lessons. You let the ambiguity hang in the air, understanding that the thrill lies as much in the seeking as in the finding. As you move deeper into thought, your senses sharpen. You imagine the air cooling as you approach one hidden gate, faint vibrations underfoot, the smell of mineral-rich soil rising. Perhaps there is a key, a specific rock formation, or a sound that resonates with the passage, waiting for an attentive observer to unlock the way. You can almost see the glimmer of unseen crystals, hear faint murmurs of wind through tunnels not yet explored. It is tantalizing, almost cruel, this mix of promise and uncertainty. And as your imagination lingers on these hidden entrances, you realize that they embody the essence of Agartha itself, a world that requires patience, curiosity, and respect, a place both accessible and forever secret. You step lightly into the imagined world of Agartha, aware that every corridor and chamber might conceal more than stone and shadow. The legends speak of sprawling subterranean cities, vast and labyrinthine, with ceilings so high they seem to touch the essence of thought itself. Your mind conjures bridges carved from crystal archways, etched with symbols that pulse faintly with light, and streets paved with smooth, iridescent stone. Mainstream history documents underground cities like Derinkuyu and Kaymakli in Turkey, shelters carved to protect entire populations from conquest. Yet Agartha's supposed scale dwarfs these spanning miles beneath continents, hidden from all who dwell above. Historians still argue whether such a city could exist undetected, or if it exists purely in imagination, a myth given weight through centuries of speculation. Walking deeper, you sense a rhythm in the air, a subtle vibration that seems almost musical. It is said that Agartha's architects designed spaces not merely for function, but to resonate with sound, light, and movement, an engineering harmony that blends art and physics. Fringe researchers claim that luminescent veins of crystal serve as natural lighting, eliminating the need for fire, while others describe chambers so vast that echoes ripple for minutes, carrying messages or music with them. You chuckle at the thought perhaps the Agarthans hold nightly concerts, just to hear the sound bounce majestically through their halls. Yet the humor is gentle. You feel awe at the mastery suggested by these tales. The inhabitants, if tales are to be trusted, navigate the city with grace and familiarity. Some accounts describe beings taller than humans, with elongated limbs and serene expressions, moving silently through corridors lined with carvings and holographic-like projections of information. Others hint at more subtle differences. Skin that glimmers faintly in low-light eyes that seem to perceive both matter and energy. Mainstream historians scoff at such descriptions as fanciful exaggerations. Yet you sense a continuity between human ingenuity and imagination. Historians still argue whether these portrayals are symbolic, intended to represent higher consciousness, or if they hint at biological adaptations to subterranean life. As you move through imagined streets, you notice the integration of nature. Watercourses run through the city clear and cold, shaping the flow of life and energy. Gardens of luminous plants climb walls, their roots and leaves reacting to touch and thought, bending and shimmering with the presence of life. Small creatures, some familiar and others completely alien, move silently along pathways, attentive yet unthreatened by intruders. You laugh quietly at the idea of a Agarthan version of a lost cat, wandering chambers with the nonchalance only an underground species could manage. Yet beneath the amusement, there is an undeniable reverence, a city that harmonizes structure, life, and purpose in a way that mirrors the human yearning for connection and understanding. You pause near a vast chamber, imagining inscriptions etched into walls recording knowledge lost above ground. Scrolls, tablets, and other objects, some described as glowing, others responding to touch, store the collective wisdom of generations. Scholars still argue whether these repositories are metaphors for memory and learning, or represent literal texts preserved in isolation from the surface world. Fringe theories propose that the Agarthans might manipulate memory itself, imprinting knowledge in ways that transcend traditional writing. You picture a young Agarthan learning history not by reading, but by absorbing pulses of energy from the walls, a process both mystical and practical. As your mind wanders, you notice intersections where corridors meet like neurons firing in a brain. Some passages twist into spirals, others extend straight. Yet each appears purposeful, directing both movement and thought. Mainstream archaeology recognizes similar planning in ancient subterranean cities, yet Agartha legend amplifies this into a poetry of design tunnels that serve as both infrastructure and spiritual guidance. You smile, imagining explorers following not just physical paths, but pathways of consciousness guided by symbols, sounds, and light. This blend of the tangible and the intangible feels quintessentially Agarthan, and it deepens your sense of wonder. Finally, you let your imagination linger on the scope of this civilization beneath the surface. Vast chambers, luminous gardens, humming corridors, and beings both familiar and otherworldly populate the city. You understand why explorers, mystics, and scholars alike have been captivated for centuries. The combination of architectural sophistication, ecological balance, and hints of advanced consciousness transforms Agartha from a simple legend into a living, breathing possibility. Walking through this imagined world, you feel a resonance with your own curiosity, a quiet affirmation that beneath the earth a place of mystery and harmony awaits those willing to believe and to observe. You sense a subtle shift in the atmosphere as you move deeper into Agartha, a quality of air that seems charged, almost sentient. The stories speak of luminescence, not born from fire, yet warm and soft, casting shadows that dance like living echoes across smooth walls. Some fringe accounts describe machines that hum and glow, their purpose, neither industrial nor magical, but a fusion of both, as if energy itself has been harnessed in ways surface humans cannot yet comprehend. Historians still argue whether such descriptions reflect actual technological remnants or symbolic representations of knowledge and enlightenment. You glance around, imagining a gentle, glowing lattice suspended in the air, pulsing with faint light, whispering secrets only perceptive beings can interpret. You walk along a corridor lined with what you imagine as crystalline conduits, the kind that some explorers claim to power entire subterranean cities. The hum is steady, a low resonance that makes the hair on your arms rise slightly. Mainstream science acknowledges natural piezoelectric properties in certain crystals where pressure creates electrical energy. But Agartha legends suggest something far more sophisticated energy that responds to intention, movement, and even thought. You chuckle quietly. Perhaps your attempts to think, turn on the lights, are futile in comparison to an intelligent crystal grid. But the idea thrills you nonetheless. Historians still argue whether these stories are metaphors for spiritual energy or literal accounts of advanced, forgotten physics. Moving further, you notice that light here is not a single spectrum, but seems to shimmer across multiple wavelengths, creating shadows and highlights that shift according to perspective. Inhabitants reportedly navigate this environment with ease, attuned to subtle variations reading not just physical space, but energetic patterns. Fringe theorists speculate that these beings perceive time and matter differently, perhaps able to interact with energy currents as readily as humans handle simple tools. Mainstream observers dismiss these claims as fanciful, yet even you, standing in this imagined environment, feel an eerie plausibility. The combination of physics, biology, and something ineffable seems almost cheerful, like a cosmic inside joke. You pause to consider the machinery described in fringe reports. These devices hum with an elegance that is neither industrial nor natural, with surfaces that curve and flex, subtly responding to proximity or thought. Some explorers claim they witnessed mechanisms that refined air or water, regulated energy flows, or stored knowledge in patterns akin to musical notes. Historians still argue whether these devices are allegorical representations of philosophical principles or literal tools of an advanced civilization. You picture pressing a finger against a smooth panel and watching a light ripple outward, illuminating the chamber in a way that feels as much organic as technological. The humor creeps in again. You imagine an Agarthan saying, "Yes, we built the city, but we also like light shows for fun." Energy seems to hum not just through machinery, but through the very architecture. Walls are etched with patterns that, according to accounts, carry resonance, like the strings of a musical instrument. You can almost hear a faint vibration beneath your feet, a harmony that guides movement and thought, offering subtle cues about direction or purpose. Fringe sources suggest this system is intertwined with consciousness, adjusting to emotions or intentions of the observer. Mainstream historians remain skeptical, yet acknowledge that ancient cultures often aligned structures with acoustics, astrology, or natural resonance, leaving open the question of whether Agartha's tales exaggerate or encode lost wisdom. You wander past glowing conduits that arch like rib cages of the earth itself, imagining that energy flows like water in these veins, providing illumination, warmth, and perhaps life itself. The interplay of light, vibration, and structure suggests an intelligence that is embedded in the city, not separate from it. Some tales hint that energy here can be felt as warmth or pressure in the hands, a tactile echo of the city's pulse. You laugh softly at the idea of a building that tickles you if you're happy, or maybe that's just a particularly cheeky Agarthan prank. As you continue, the subtle interplay of technology and environment reinforces the sense that Agartha is alive. Luminescent veins, responsive machinery, and harmonic spaces suggest a civilization that understands energy, light, and consciousness in ways far beyond what surface humans have yet achieved. Mainstream science may scoff, yet in your mind every vibration, glow, and hum carries meaning. Guiding explorers not just through tunnels, but into understanding. You realize that this combination of light energy and subtle technology is not merely functional. It is an art, a dance, and perhaps even a conversation with the universe itself. In Agartha, the line between tool architecture and life blurs, and you stand breath-held, marveling at the harmony beneath the earth. You pause, sensing movement ahead, subtle but undeniable. The inhabitants of Agartha, the stories insist, are watching, but not in the way surface humans might imagine. They move with calm precision, their presence serene yet alert, attuned to both the physical and energetic flows of their city. Some accounts describe beings taller than average humans, with elongated limbs and luminous eyes that seem to read more than just the surface world. Fringe theorists whisper of subtle variations in skin tone or iridescence, the kind that reflects ambient light without appearing artificial. Historians still argue whether these descriptions are allegorical, meant to represent heightened consciousness, or if they reflect actual adapted subterranean physiology. You step carefully, imagining the way they glide through chambers lined with inscriptions, murals, and symbols that hum softly with latent energy. The Agarthans, it seems, live in a balance of practicality and artistry. Corridors are both functional and aesthetically harmonious, echoing with a quiet music of movement. Some reports claim these beings communicate telepathically, exchanging ideas with the ease of a glance or subtle gesture. You smile at the thought, imagining a society where arguments take minutes, not hours, because thoughts flow directly. Yet beneath the humor lies reverence. You sense intelligence, refined over generations, blending observation, intuition, and empathy. The city itself appears to respond to inhabitants almost symbiotically. Walkways shimmer faintly under steps, and doors seem to recognize intent rather than physical keys. Fringe accounts suggest that newcomers can be sensed by the city itself, prompting guidance or subtle barriers depending on their approach. Mainstream scholars often dismiss this as myth, yet they acknowledge the advanced acoustics engineering and ecological design in known subterranean settlements. Historians still argue whether Agartha's responsive architecture is metaphorical or literal, but the stories persist, compelling imagination and inquiry. You notice the Agarthans interacting with their environment in ways both familiar and extraordinary. They cultivate gardens that react to touch and thought, manipulate energy flows with subtle gestures, and maintain machinery that hums in resonance with natural systems. Some fringe researchers suggest these beings perceive multiple dimensions of energy, simultaneously blending physical, mental, and spiritual awareness in everyday activity. You chuckle at the mental image of an Agarthan passing a glowing crystal to a colleague with the casual efficiency of someone handing a cup of tea. It feels playful, yet profoundly advanced. As you move further, you imagine rituals integrated seamlessly into daily life. Meditative walks along glowing corridors, harmonic exercises in resonance chambers, and collaborative work that seems effortless and joyful. The inhabitants are neither monks nor engineers in the surface sense. They embody a synthesis of roles, merging labor, learning, and contemplation into an effortless rhythm. You feel a subtle awe at the notion that a society could prioritize both intellect and mindfulness so fully. Historians still argue whether such portrayals exaggerate utopian ideals or reflect lost human potential projected into myth. Small details reveal much about their character. You picture beings adjusting the flow of water in channels with thought guiding plants to grow in harmony with both architecture and energy currents. Some accounts hint at communication through subtle vibrations in walls or floors, a language beyond spoken words, allowing efficiency without disrupting the serene environment. Fringe speculation even suggests these beings may live longer than humans, their biology and energy intimately connected to the city itself. You can't help but grin at the idea, eternal residents of a glowing subterranean metropolis, laughing quietly at your clumsy surface world assumptions. By now you feel the weight of observation and imagination intertwined. The Agarthans are not simply residents, they are caretakers, guides, and participants in a city that is alive in both material and subtle ways. You sense that to understand them fully, one must adopt their rhythm, attune to the vibrations of the city, and open perception to possibilities beyond ordinary sight. The blend of awe, humor, and quiet reverence leaves you both humbled and invigorated. In this world beneath the earth, life is not just survival. It is an elegant interplay of consciousness, environment, and purpose, and you as the observer are invited to witness it with care, patience, and curiosity. You wander deeper, drawn toward the subtle life forms that thrive in Agartha's subterranean ecosystem. The air is redolent with earthy scents and faint floral notes from plants that glow with their own luminescence, casting soft, dancing patterns across the walls. Mainstream botany acknowledges that bioluminescent fungi and certain algae exist on the surface and in caves, yet the Agartha legends describe entire forests of radiant flora, responding almost intuitively to motion, sound, or even thought. Historians still argue whether these accounts are metaphorical representations of spiritual enlightenment or descriptions of a real, self-regulating ecology. You lean closer to a cluster of glowing leaves, imagining the tiniest tendrils curling as if to greet your presence. Animals here are no less extraordinary. Some are reminiscent of surface species, foxes, birds, or insects, but their forms seem subtly enhanced, eyes that shimmer like crystal wings that hum faintly fur, or scales reflecting light in unnatural but beautiful patterns. Fringe theorists speculate these creatures are sensitive to mental energy, reacting not merely to movement, but to intention, emotion, and thought. You chuckle quietly, picturing a small, fox-like creature tilting its head, considering whether your curiosity merits cautious acceptance or gentle scolding. Historians still argue whether these tales are exaggerations of ecological observation or imaginative leaps based on cave-dwelling species seen by explorers. You notice a stream winding through the subterranean forest, its water unusually clear, teeming with luminescent fish whose scales refract light like tiny prisms. Some reports describe the water carrying subtle vibrations, perhaps guiding creatures and plants, while fringe interpretations suggest the stream itself could transmit information or energy. You stoop to imagine dipping your hand into the cool flow, sensing it almost as a living entity, tickling your skin and fingers. A light-hearted thought surfaces maybe Agarthans invented the first spa. Centuries before surface humans realized relaxation could be therapeutic. The plants themselves exhibit remarkable adaptability. Some vines appear to grow in response to touch, curling, or glowing in acknowledgement. Flowers open in harmony with nearby footsteps, petals reacting to sound or vibration. Fringe accounts describe these species as semi-sentient, existing in a constant feedback loop with the environment and inhabitants. Historians still argue whether these descriptions are symbolic, representing harmony and responsiveness in myth, or based on observable phenomena, perhaps exaggerated over generations. You imagine walking through this bioluminescent forest, every step creating a subtle chorus of movement, light, and gentle hums. You pause near a cavern where moss carpets the floor like a soft rug, punctuated by small phosphorescent fungi that glimmer faintly with each breath. Tiny creatures scuttle, hover, or slither through the foliage, perfectly adapted to the low-light conditions. You picture them as participants in a subtle living orchestra, their movements contributing to the ambient resonance of the cavern. Some fringe writers claim these animals act as sentinels or guides sensitive to human intentions, ready to alert inhabitants of visitors' approach. You smile at the mental image, a tiny glowing squirrel-like creature raising a single crystalline paw as if giving a polite nod of approval. Water flora and fauna together form a system of interdependence, unlike anything you've experienced on the surface. You imagine delicate energy channels running through roots, vines, and watercourses, sustaining life while responding to shifts in movement or thought. Fringe accounts suggest this system could even communicate subtle warnings, guidance, or environmental adjustments to residents. Mainstream scholars acknowledge complex subterranean ecosystems on Earth, yet these descriptions push the imagination into a space that borders fantasy, and yet somehow it feels plausible, natural, and complete. As you move through this hidden ecosystem, the interplay of light, sound, and life reinforces Agartha's sense of deliberate design. Nothing seems random. Each plant, creature, and stream serves a function not just ecological, but perhaps spiritual and energetic as well. You sense that the inhabitants' advanced awareness combined with this responsive ecosystem creates a harmony difficult to replicate on the surface. Humor bubbles quietly in your mind, a tiny joke at the universe's expense. Imagine asking for directions here and getting a chorus of glowing critters pointing the way with their tiny luminous eyes. Yet the reverence outweighs amusement, leaving you in awe of a subterranean world that breathes, listens, and responds as one living organism. You step into a vast chamber where walls shimmer with inscriptions, scrolls, and objects that seem to hum softly in resonance with your presence. The legends insist that Agartha preserves knowledge lost to the surface world. Wisdom collected over millennia, encoded not just in symbols, but in forms that interact with perception itself. Mainstream history recognizes the existence of the ancient libraries from Alexandria to the monasteries of Tibet, where human knowledge was painstakingly recorded. Yet Agartha is said to elevate this to an entirely new level, blending text, imagery, and energy into repositories that are living, dynamic, and responsive. Historians still argue whether these descriptions are metaphorical, illustrating the preservation of consciousness, or if they reflect tangible repositories of ancient wisdom. As you walk past glowing shelves and carved tablets, you feel a faint vibration in the air, a subtle invitation to engage, to absorb, to sense. Fringe researchers describe Agarthan knowledge systems that combine sound, light, and tactile feedback, allowing learners to assimilate complex concepts almost intuitively. You smile at the idea, a young Agarthan mastering astronomy by touching a pulsating diagram, their fingers tracing constellations that respond to thought. Even if exaggerated, the image evokes a harmony between knowledge and perception, a concept that human libraries with their dusty tomes rarely achieve. You notice patterns in the inscriptions, geometric shapes interwoven with abstract symbols, forming sequences that seem both mathematical and poetic. Some fringe accounts claim these patterns encode advanced understanding of physics, energy manipulation, or even consciousness itself. Historians still argue whether these are symbolic representations or literal instructions for manipulating the environment. Yet you feel drawn to trace the lines with your fingertips, imagining them alive, vibrating slightly under your touch. A gentle laugh escapes you at the thought that your fingers might be graded on finesse. Perhaps Agarthans enjoy a bit of dry humor, even in their pursuit of knowledge. The air carries a faint scent reminiscent of aged parchment minerals, and something subtly metallic, as if knowledge itself has weight, texture, and resonance. You imagine chambers filled with scrolls that project holographic-like images when touched, the scenes shifting fluidly to illustrate concepts beyond mere words. Some fringe theories suggest that these knowledge repositories are partially self-organizing, rearranging based on the learner's focus, intention, or curiosity. Mainstream archaeologists remain skeptical, yet they acknowledge that ancient cultures encoded information in multidimensional ways: musical notation, architectural alignment, and symbolic art. hinting that the human mind has long sought to expand beyond linear text. You pause before a series of glowing tablets that depict cycles of celestial movement. The motion is precise, almost choreographed, as if each planet, comet, and star moves not just in space, but in resonance with energy flows within the chamber itself. Fringe accounts suggest that understanding these patterns allows inhabitants to manipulate time perception, environmental energy, or even aspects of consciousness. You chuckle lightly at the thought of a cosmic ballet where missing a step might merely annoy a wise observer. Yet you sense a serious purpose in this display. Historians still argue whether these celestial diagrams were ever practical guides or primarily symbolic tools of meditation and awareness. Small details reveal much about the relationship between knowledge and inhabitant. You imagine Agarthans tracing symbols with gentle fingers, their presence amplifying understanding energy, flowing between learner and medium seamlessly. Some accounts suggest they can read knowledge directly from materials, perceiving histories encoded in the crystal lattice parchment fibers or metallic traces. Fringe theorists propose this represents a form of education impossible on the surface. A merging of sensory experience and thought. You allow yourself a whimsical thought. Perhaps they pass exams by humming correctly rather than writing essays. The humor is light, but the reverence for intelligence is palpable. You walk further, feeling a shift in air and temperature, as if the knowledge itself radiates subtle energy. Scrolls, carvings, and crystalline objects hum, with a resonance that invites observation, reflection, and reverent study. The chamber feels alive, not just as a storage of information, but as an active participant in learning and perception. You imagine leaving the chamber carrying faint impressions of wisdom along with subtle vibrations in your consciousness. Historians still argue whether Agartha's repositories represent literal physical knowledge or allegorical embodiments of awareness. Yet the chamber impresses upon you that knowledge is in this hidden city, a living, breathing entity intertwined with life, energy, and consciousness itself. You follow a corridor that seems to hum softly, aware that every sound and vibration might carry significance. The legends speak of Agartha's spiritual practices woven seamlessly into daily life, from harmonic chants to meditation rituals that shape not just the mind, but the very environment. Mainstream anthropology acknowledges that subterranean cultures often incorporated ritual and belief into architecture and community life. Yet Agartha is said to elevate this integration to an art form, blending science, consciousness, and spirituality. Historians still argue whether these descriptions reflect symbolic representation or real practices that harmonize energy, thought, and physical space. You step into a chamber where the air vibrates with subtle resonance, as if the walls themselves participate in the practice. Fringe accounts describe harmonic exercises that manipulate energy currents, allowing inhabitants to communicate, maintain ecological balance, or even influence perception and cognition. You smile at the mental image of Agarthans practicing a meditative tune-up, their voices blending into the architecture, creating harmonies that ripple through corridors and gardens. A cheeky thought arises. Maybe they even hold underground karaoke nights. Perfect pitch, guaranteed, of course. Yet beneath the humor, the reverence is clear. These practices serve both practical and spiritual purposes, entwining life and consciousness in a way surface humans rarely encounter. Inhabitants reportedly engage in meditative walks, following paths aligned with natural energy flows. Some corridors are said to respond to intention, subtly guiding movement, while ritual spaces vibrate with amplified resonance, enabling focused mental or spiritual exercises. Fringe researchers suggest that these practices enhance perception, intuition, and even longevity. Mainstream scholars acknowledge that sound, rhythm, and movement have measurable effects on human cognition and well-being, yet they remain skeptical of claims about direct manipulation of energy or consciousness. Historians still argue whether these accounts are metaphorical allegories for disciplined life or literal observations of Agartha's capabilities. The city's ritual spaces are often adorned with carvings, glowing symbols, and flowing watercourses, all designed to interact harmoniously with sound and light. You imagine standing before one of these sacred walls, your thoughts aligning with vibrations, creating subtle shifts in the environment. Plants might tilt toward you, light might flicker, or water might ripple in perfect synchrony. Fringe theories propose that these interactions serve as a feedback loop, integrating individual intention with the city's overall energetic equilibrium. Mainstream researchers note that sound resonance and water flow can have profound psychological effects, though the scale described here borders on fantastical. You notice the inhabitants' attire and instruments simple yet elegant, designed to enhance resonance and movement. Some carry handheld devices that hum in harmony with chants, amplifying or guiding vibrations. Others manipulate crystal conduits to produce subtle harmonic effects throughout the chambers. Fringe accounts claim that these objects act as extensions of consciousness, translating intention into perceivable energy flows. You chuckle at the thought of an Agarthan DJ curating subtle vibrations for meditation sessions, perhaps the ultimate underground music festival. Historians still argue whether these instruments are literal or symbolic tools representing the unity of environment, body, and mind. Daily routines themselves are infused with ritual. Mealtime work and social interaction often follow harmonic cycles, blending efficiency with contemplative awareness. Plants, water, and energy conduits respond dynamically, forming a living, responsive environment. You imagine a resident pausing mid-task, inhaling deeply, and adjusting a water flow or vibration to maintain balance. A practice integrated so naturally that it becomes second nature. Fringe researchers suggest that this continuous calibration of environment and self is a core feature of Agarthan life, a blend of meditation, ecology, and technology that surface humans would struggle to replicate. Finally, you reflect on the impact of these spiritual practices. They appear to foster not only physical and mental well-being, but also social harmony, environmental stewardship, and cognitive attunement. The humor, elegance, and meticulous integration reinforce the idea that life in Agartha is lived with intentionality, awareness, and respect for both seen and unseen energies. Historians still argue whether such practices are rooted in observation mythology or a combination. Yet the depiction resonates deeply, leaving you with a sense of awe. You realize that in this city beneath the earth, spirituality is not separate from life. It is the thread that weaves existence into coherence, beauty, and resonance. You sense a subtle tension in the air as you continue, aware that even in a city of harmony, shadows of conflict exist. Legends tell of previous surface intrusions, explorers, adventurers, or accidental wanderers who disrupted the delicate equilibrium of Agartha. Inhabitants reportedly approached such situations with caution, employing subtle barriers, guidance, or strategic isolation to maintain safety. Mainstream history records how subterranean communities often built defensive networks, from secret chambers to hidden tunnels, to protect inhabitants from outsiders. Yet Agartha is described as balancing conflict with diplomacy, secrecy with engagement. Historians still argue whether these accounts are literal, symbolic, or lessons in the importance of preserving hidden knowledge. You imagine explorers stepping into a vast chamber, unaware of the beings observing from shadows, their presence subtle yet unmistakable. Some stories describe intricate warning systems, vibrational cues, guided energy flows, or responsive architecture that adjusts to intruders. Fringe accounts suggest the city itself can sense intent, subtly rerouting corridors, illuminating paths selectively, or concealing passages entirely. You grin at the notion the Earth playing an elaborate game of hide and seek with humans centuries before escape rooms existed. Yet the underlying seriousness cannot be ignored. The Agarthans' priority is survival and the protection of knowledge. Conflict is not only external. Legends speak of internal debates within Agartha, sometimes regarding engagement with the surface world, other times about governance, trade, or resource allocation. You picture councils of serene beings, their discussions carried out in chambers that resonate with their voices, amplifying clarity and comprehension. Fringe theorists claim that such debates are influenced by subtle energy currents in the city, allowing decisions to align with long-term balance rather than immediate desire. Mainstream historians note that ancient human societies often incorporated ritualized debate and deliberation. But Agartha's integration of environmental and energetic awareness seems unique. Isolation appears central to the city's stability. Some passages are sealed for centuries, only opened during rare alignments or after rigorous preparation by both inhabitants and visitors. Stories insist that exposure to Agartha before readiness can disrupt equilibrium, both for the city and the intruder. You laugh quietly at the thought of a visitor's manual being mandatory, complete with reminders to respect echoes and not tap on glowing walls. Historians still argue whether such extreme caution is literal or metaphorical, emphasizing prudence and respect for hidden wisdom. You move past chambers where echoes ripple longer than expected, creating an auditory map of intentions and past activities. Some fringe accounts suggest these echoes are more than sound. They carry residual energy, memory, or information detectable by sensitive beings. You imagine an Agarthan entering a chamber, listening carefully, and understanding the history of all who had walked before. Mainstream studies confirm that sound can imprint on environments, subtly affecting materials or perception. Yet the scale described in Agartha remains speculative. Diplomacy with outsiders seems to have been conducted with subtlety and precision. Legends speak of guides, intermediaries, or signals left for those deemed worthy, allowing selective interaction without compromising secrecy. Some fringe narratives describe a council capable of reading both intent and alignment, facilitating agreements that preserve Agartha's integrity. You picture a delicate negotiation where every gesture, every energy pulse, matters, a sort of chess game played in 3 dimensions with consciousness as the medium. Historians still argue whether these tales are symbolic lessons on ethics, governance, and secrecy, or records of real-world interactions. Even in this narrative of conflict and isolation, humor persists. You imagine Agarthans chuckling softly when humans fumble through corridors, doors shifting, crystals vibrating in bemused rhythm. Yet beneath the levity lies a profound seriousness. The city is a sanctuary, a repository of knowledge and life that must be preserved. The legends insist on vigilance, reflection, and a deep awareness of both environment and intent. You realize that understanding Agartha requires more than curiosity. It demands empathy, patience, and respect. Qualities that define not just the city, but its extraordinary inhabitants. You step into a chamber of records and artifacts, a space where the passage of time feels fluid, almost irrelevant. The legends of Agartha speak of archives containing objects that bridge eras, blending ancient craftsmanship with inexplicable technology. Mainstream history acknowledges artifacts preserved in subterranean sites, tools, pottery, manuscripts. But Agartha's collection is described as surpassing anything known, both in quantity and sophistication. Historians still argue whether such accounts are allegorical representations of accumulated wisdom or literal descriptions of preserved objects beyond human comprehension. You imagine tracing a delicate object with your fingertips, feeling its weight, texture, and a subtle hum of energy beneath the surface. Some fringe theorists claim that Agarthan archives are partially interactive, Crystals, metals, and carved tablets supposedly store knowledge in multidimensional formats, retrievable through touch intention or vibrational resonance. You grin at the mental image of a being reading a crystal with the ease of turning a page, absorbing centuries of wisdom in moments. Mainstream scholars note that mnemonic devices, storytelling, and symbolic encoding have long been used to preserve information, but Agartha is said to take this concept to an almost magical extreme. Historians still argue whether these descriptions should be interpreted as fantastical exaggerations or reflections of advanced understanding now lost. You move past shelves containing strange mechanical devices whose purposes are elusive, yet suggest functionality far beyond conventional technology. Some accounts describe mechanisms that regulate environmental conditions, convert energy, or even record events in subtle, imperceptible ways. Fringe writers suggest these machines are part of a broader system integrating the city's physical, biological, and cognitive networks. You chuckle at the idea of a machine keeping tabs on residents' hydration and meditation schedules simultaneously, an efficiency we can only dream of on the surface. Historians still argue whether such devices are purely allegorical or based on misunderstood observations of real-world engineering. The air here carries a faint metallic and mineral aroma, punctuated by subtle floral notes from luminescent plants integrated into the architecture. You imagine the inhabitants moving with deliberate care, ensuring that every element contributes to a harmonious resonance. Fringe sources suggest that these environmental details are more than aesthetic. They subtly modulate perception, cognition, and energy flow. Mainstream archaeologists recognize that design and environment can influence mood and productivity, but the scale and integration described in Agartha challenge conventional understanding. Historians still debate whether such descriptions reflect actual practice or the imaginative layering of myth over observation. You pause before a crystalline object pulsing with faint light. Stories insist that such items carry encoded histories, preserved not just in matter, but in vibrational patterns. Some fringe accounts suggest that these objects can communicate directly with an observer, transmitting knowledge or guidance in ways beyond language. You imagine a curious hand hovering, feeling subtle shifts and receiving impressions of events long past. Mainstream historians acknowledge the symbolic significance of artifacts across cultures, but this level of interactive preservation pushes imagination into almost science fiction territory. Historians still argue whether these descriptions are metaphorical, allegorical, or literal accounts of extraordinary preservation. Even mundane items like vessels, writing tools, or textiles are said to possess subtle harmonics, interacting with both inhabitants and environment. Fringe theorists propose that these objects contribute to a city-wide consciousness, a network of matter, energy, and thought functioning in unison. You laugh lightly, imagining a coffee cup that gently hums in agreement when picked up. Humor is never absent, even in such advanced sophistication. Historians still debate the literal versus symbolic interpretations of these claims, yet the imaginative coherence is undeniable. Finally, you sense that Agartha's archives are more than storage. They are living dialogues responsive to attention, movement, and thought. Every object, crystal, and inscription participates in the city's ongoing life-preserving wisdom while facilitating understanding. Walking through this chamber, you feel a delicate rhythm. Curiosity met with subtle guidance, learning intertwined with resonance. Historians may still argue about the literal reality of these phenomena, but the underlying truth resonates clearly in your imagination. Knowledge in Agartha is alive, interactive, and harmoniously integrated with the very fabric of existence. You descend further, drawn toward the energy conduits that pulse softly beneath the city, a subtle reminder that Agartha thrives not just on matter, but on currents of invisible power. Mainstream physics recognizes energy transmission through natural geological formations. Piezoelectric crystals and water flow, but the legends insist that Agartha manipulates energy consciously, creating an integrated network, supporting both life and knowledge. Fringe theorists suggest that these currents can amplify thought perception or intention, creating an environment where consciousness and physical reality interact in ways surface humans barely comprehend. Historians still argue whether these accounts are symbolic spiritual allegories or records of advanced but lost technology. You follow a faintly glowing conduit, imagining it branching beneath chambers, gardens, and archives, distributing warmth, light, and perhaps consciousness itself. The hum is subtle, almost musical, vibrating in your chest, as if syncing with your heartbeat. Fringe accounts claim that Agarthans navigate and regulate these conduits intuitively, sensing fluctuations as naturally as humans perceive wind or temperature. Mainstream researchers note that natural resonance exists in subterranean formations, but Agartha stories suggest an intentional, conscious manipulation of these energies, an idea simultaneously implausible and mesmerizing. You chuckle at the thought. Perhaps the city itself is a musician performing an eternal symphony for those attuned enough to hear. Some tunnels are lined with crystalline arrays, their facets catching and refracting energy in patterns that guide residents or amplify environmental flows. Fringe narratives suggest these arrays can store memory project knowledge or even subtly influence emotions and thought. You picture a corridor alive with flickering light and gentle vibrations, teaching, reminding, and communicating simultaneously without a single spoken word. Mainstream historians often dismiss such claims, yet they acknowledge that ancient humans experimented with acoustics, crystals, and resonance for ritual and practical purposes. Historians still argue whether Agartha represents exaggeration, allegory, or a literal practice lost to time. Energy also flows through living beings. Plants, animals, and even Agarthan humans are said to harmonize with the conduits, interacting with subtle vibrations in ways that promote growth, cognition, and balance. You imagine a glowing vine stretching toward a conduit, feeding on resonance while emitting gentle light, a silent collaborator in the city's vitality. Fringe theorists suggest this bioenergetic network creates a feedback loop, enhancing perception and communal awareness. You laugh lightly at the mental image of a plant offering unsolicited advice. Not that way. The resonance is off. It is charmingly whimsical, yet beneath the humor lies profound intelligence embedded in every element of the city. You pause near an intersection where conduits converge, sensing a subtle shift in vibration, as if multiple currents communicate, negotiating flow, harmonizing pressure, and balancing energy. Some fringe accounts propose that these junctions act as nodes of collective consciousness, where thought, intention, and material energy intersect. Mainstream science recognizes complex feedback in environmental systems, but nothing remotely on this scale has been documented. Historians still debate whether such interpretations are metaphorical projections or exaggerated observations, yet the concept ignites imagination like a spark in a dark cavern. The design appears deliberate, conduits branching like veins, chambers aligned with harmonic nodes, gardens, and flowing water responding to fluctuations in energy. You imagine Agarthans moving through these networks, sensing currents like currents in the ocean, adjusting flow, tuning vibrations, and interacting with the city as though it were a living organism. Fringe theories suggest that this mastery of energy underpins longevity, cognitive enhancement, and societal harmony. You chuckle quietly, thinking that perhaps Agartha has the world's most sophisticated wellness program, centuries before humanity considered meditation apps or energy drinks. Finally, you feel that the energy network is not just infrastructure, but lifeblood. It weaves through stone, crystal, water plants, and inhabitants, creating an interdependent, responsive system. Every pulse, hum, and flicker contributes to the city's stability and intelligence. Historians still argue whether Agartha's energy manipulation is metaphorical, symbolic, or literal, but as you imagine yourself walking through this lattice, guided by subtle currents and illuminated by harmonic light, the possibility feels plausible, mesmerizing, and wondrous. You recognize that energy in Agartha is not just power, it is life, consciousness, and connection itself. You enter a hall unlike any you've imagined so far, where time itself seems malleable, slowed and stretched in ways that defy your expectations. The legends of Agartha insist that certain chambers influence perception, allowing inhabitants to extend focus memory or even awareness beyond the usual bounds of human experience. Mainstream science recognizes that environmental factors such as light, sound, and vibration can alter perception of time, but the subterranean city takes it to extremes. Fringe theorists claim these effects are intentionally designed, manipulating consciousness to harmonize with the city's rhythms. Historians still argue whether such accounts reflect spiritual metaphor, psychological phenomena, or literal mechanisms lost to time. The room pulses softly, a harmonic interplay of glowing walls, resonating conduits, and subtle air currents. You imagine yourself walking slowly, aware that each step is synchronized with vibrations you can barely perceive. Fringe accounts describe chambers where thought can subtly influence the environment. Lights responding to focus energy flows, shifting in harmony with intention. You chuckle at the idea of a resident misplacing a thought and accidentally dimming an entire corridor, humor threading lightly through a setting of deep reverence. Mainstream observers recognize the psychological effects of immersive environments, but remain skeptical of intentional manipulation on this scale. You notice inscriptions along the walls, patterns that shift imperceptibly as you move, reflecting both light and thought. Some fringe narratives suggest that these inscriptions encode multidimensional information, offering guidance, wisdom, or warnings to those who can interpret them. Mainstream historians note that symbolic systems in human culture often carry multiple layers of meaning, from mnemonic devices to spiritual allegories. Historians still argue whether the Agarthan inscriptions are literal interactive texts or metaphoric constructs illustrating higher consciousness. You pause, imagining your fingers brushing against a glyph, feeling it hum faintly in recognition, like the city acknowledging your curiosity. The air is filled with subtle scents and faint musical tones, harmonizing with the chamber's rhythm. Fringe theorists claim that the combined effects of light, vibration, and aroma create a cognitive resonance, enhancing memory, intuition, and awareness. Mainstream researchers recognize environmental stimuli influence on cognition, yet the scale described here stretches credulity. You picture an Agarthan meditating in the chamber, adjusting micro-vibrations in walls, subtly fine-tuning perception for hours or even days. A playful thought surfaces. Maybe they even compete to see who can hold focus the longest, a kind of subterranean mindfulness Olympics. Some chambers reportedly link to celestial alignments, amplifying resonance at specific times of year. Fringe sources suggest that these alignments coordinate energy flows with cosmic cycles, enhancing learning, meditation, or insight. You imagine standing in a circle of luminescent stone, feeling subtle pulses sync with distant planetary motion, as if the universe itself is whispering its secrets. Historians still argue whether these alignments are allegorical, ritualistic, or indicative of literal astronomical observation, but the poetic precision is undeniable. The combination of space vibration and intention seems designed to elevate consciousness, bridging the terrestrial and cosmic simultaneously. You move further and sense that even the air seems alive, responding to presence, thought, and intent. Fringe accounts describe Agarthans navigating and interacting with these subtle currents to shape both environment and perception. You picture a being walking through the chamber, fingertips trailing along conduits, nudging light and energy in delicate patterns while simultaneously engaging with the mental currents of the city. Mainstream science recognizes feedback loops in complex systems, but has yet to explore consciousness as a manipulable field. Historians still argue whether Agartha's descriptions exaggerate natural phenomena or encode lost techniques. Finally, you feel that time in these chambers is not linear, but layered. Moments stretch, compress, and intertwine, allowing inhabitants to absorb, reflect, and act with extraordinary awareness. Humor and reverence coexist. You imagine a resident joking about how many hours they spent meditating only to realize a few minutes passed above ground. The blend of rhythm, energy, and perception seems designed to cultivate insight, patience, and harmony. You recognize that Agartha's manipulation of temporal perception is not mere trickery. It is a profound tool for learning, reflection, and alignment with the deeper currents of the world below. You descend into a section of Agartha that feels almost sacred, a convergence of architecture, energy, and consciousness. The legends insist that this is where the city's collective memory is most palpable, a place where past, present, and potential futures intertwine. Mainstream archaeology acknowledges ritual and memorial spaces in ancient subterranean settlements, yet Agartha's supposed depth and interactivity surpass anything documented. Fringe theorists suggest that these spaces act as conduits of collective experience, allowing inhabitants to perceive history directly through subtle resonance. Historians still argue whether such accounts are metaphorical, allegorical, or literal manifestations of extraordinary memory preservation. Walking through this luminous hall, you notice subtle shifts in air density, a tactile reminder of energy moving in invisible streams. Crystals embedded in walls pulse gently, seemingly responding to your presence and attention. Some fringe accounts describe these as consciousness amplifiers reflecting collective knowledge back to those attuned. Mainstream scholars recognize that architecture can influence psychological states, but the precision and subtlety described here suggest intentional design on an unprecedented scale. You grin quietly at the thought. Perhaps Agarthans laugh at surface humans fumbling with meditation apps when they have halls that literally hum with wisdom. You sense the inhabitants moving silently, navigating corridors, chambers, and energy nodes with grace and intuition. Some reports describe them interacting with memory crystals or resonance conduits, enhancing recollection or accessing knowledge in ways that surpass written texts. Fringe researchers suggest that these practices integrate mind, environment, and energy, creating a living library of awareness. Mainstream historians acknowledge that human societies have long encoded collective memory in ritual art and architecture, yet Agartha's methods are described as multidimensional and interactive. Historians still argue whether these descriptions are symbolic or literal. As you explore further, you notice subtle indicators of chronology, energy pulses, crystalline arrays, and inscriptions that encode events not just visually, but vibrationally. Some fringe narratives claim that a single Agarthan can read these streams, perceiving centuries of history in a moment. You picture them absorbing the rise and fall of civilizations, environmental changes, and cosmic alignments with effortless focus. Mainstream studies acknowledge mnemonic techniques in ancient societies, but nothing approaching the immediacy and complexity suggested here. Historians still debate whether such portrayals are allegorical representations of advanced cognition or literal accounts. You pause near a crystal lattice that hums faintly, almost like a heartbeat. Fringe accounts suggest that these lattices can encode both events and intentions, a living archive that evolves with the city and its inhabitants. Mainstream archaeologists note the importance of continuity in cultural memory, but lack evidence for multi-dimensional interactive repositories. You chuckle quietly at the idea perhaps an Agarthan could recall an entire season of harvest political shifts and musical compositions in the time it takes a surface human to read a paragraph. Yet beneath the humor, or lingers a recognition of intelligence intertwined with environment. The chamber seems to expand and contract subtly, as though the city itself breathes with awareness. Some fringe researchers claim that Agarthans can interact with these spaces through thought intention and subtle gesture, shaping the flow of knowledge energy and perception simultaneously. You imagine a resident adjusting a pulse here, a light there, harmonizing both memory and present experience effortlessly. Mainstream historians recognize that sensory environments can affect cognition and perception. Yet the scale and integration here stretch credulity, hovering between the mystical and the plausible. Historians still argue whether these accounts exaggerate or encode lost practices. Finally, you realize that this section of Agartha is not merely about preserving history, it is about participating in it. Past, present, and potential futures coalesce with energy consciousness and environment intertwined. Humor lightly surfaces. You imagine a resident nudging a crystal and whispering, "Don't tell them we just rearranged the timeline for fun." Yet the underlying truth is solemn in this space. Memory is alive, interactive, and sacred. You recognize that Agartha's archives, energy networks, and perception-altering chambers all converge here, a testament to a civilization harmonizing thought life and time beneath the earth. You arrive at the deepest, most secretive levels of Agartha, where the air feels heavier, yet charged with quiet resonance. The legends speak of this zone as the heart of the city, the point where all energy, consciousness, and knowledge converge. Mainstream studies recognize subterranean cores in ancient settlements, ritual centers, storage vaults, or natural caverns. But Agartha is said to transcend these functions, existing as both the city's physical and metaphysical center. Fringe theorists claim that this heart houses not only the most advanced machinery, but also the collective consciousness of the city's inhabitants. Historians still argue whether these accounts are symbolic, spiritual allegories, or literal descriptions of extraordinary phenomena. As you step forward, a subtle glow illuminates your path, revealing conduits that pulse in complex rhythms, intertwining like neural networks across vast chambers. You imagine the energy coursing through the city, integrating life, knowledge, and perception into a unified system. Fringe narratives suggest that the central heart can amplify thought intention and even emotion, creating a feedback loop between inhabitants and the environment. You smile at the mental image, a city that tunes itself to the collective mood of its citizens, where even a laugh or sigh has tangible resonance. Mainstream science acknowledges feedback systems, yet nothing on this scale has been verified. The architecture here is breathtaking, soaring arches, crystalline lattices, and harmonic chambers that seem to bend light and sound subtly around you. Some fringe accounts describe structures that act as energy transformers, storing and redistributing currents to maintain equilibrium throughout Agartha. You picture an Agarthan stepping gracefully between chambers, fingertips brushing conduits, subtly adjusting flow, like a musician conducting a symphony of matter, energy, and consciousness. Historians still debate whether such accounts exaggerate the city's sophistication or encode ancient principles now lost to surface civilizations. You pause before a crystalline monolith that hums faintly, its light pulsing in patterns that suggest a living rhythm. Fringe researchers claim that such monoliths serve as focal points for the city's collective memory and energy, encoding information, intention, and history simultaneously. Mainstream archaeologists note that monumental architecture often holds symbolic or ritual significance, yet the functional complexity attributed to Agartha exceeds anything documented. You imagine leaning closer, feeling subtle vibrations against your palm, receiving faint impressions of millennia of thought and action. A cheeky thought surfaces. Perhaps the city is silently judging your curiosity, winking with energy you cannot consciously perceive. Small details reveal astonishing integration conduits, weaving through floors, walls, and ceilings. gardens responding to both light and vibration, chambers aligning harmonically with subterranean resonance. Fringe accounts suggest that inhabitants navigate this labyrinth intuitively, guided by energy flows and the city's subtle instructions. Mainstream historians recognize that some ancient cultures aligned structures with sound celestial patterns and energy, but the scale described here is exceptional. Historians still argue whether such descriptions are literal engineering feats, spiritual allegories, or imaginative extrapolations. The city's guardians described as luminous and serene move with quiet grace overseeing energy, knowledge, and life without interference or dominance. You picture them subtly adjusting currents, guiding newcomers, and maintaining balance with effortless precision. Fringe theorists suggest their consciousness may integrate with the city itself, allowing seamless interaction with its systems. You laugh quietly at the idea of an Agarthan whispering to a conduit. Careful with that pulse, it's Monday morning. Yet beneath the humor lies a profound reverence. These beings embody harmony, awareness, and patience. On a scale the surface world struggles to imagine. Finally, you sense the unity of Agartha architecture, energy, knowledge, inhabitants, and ecosystem, all intertwined in a living symphony. You realize that the city is both teacher and participant, nurturing growth, balance, and understanding. Humor and solemnity coexist as you imagine the subtle quirks and jokes hidden among centuries of wisdom. Historians may still argue about the literal or symbolic nature of these descriptions, yet the truth resonates in your mind. Agartha is a testament to harmony, awareness, and the extraordinary possibilities of life beneath the earth.